My name is Cindy. I'm a 35-year-old office worker. I met my husband Joe through a colleague at work, a kind of blind date, and we got married. Joe and I are of the same age and shared the same hobbies, and I thought life with him would be enjoyable. My in-laws were cheerful and kind people, and my mother-in-law said, "We were worried because Joe hadn't brought home a single potential bride until now. Please, take good care of Joe." Her words stabbed at my heart a bit, since I'm of the same age as him, but I pretended not to notice. A year has passed since our marriage. There were times when we argued and Joe would immediately mention divorce, but I thought that's part of married life, and that happened. I think we got along relatively well. On weekends, we drove and took day trips, a hobby of ours. Before we were married, I traveled alone a lot, but after marriage, we basically acted as a pair. Joe lived with his parents until we got married, and he seemed to use their car when he went out. So after we got married, we have been using my car since. That car is nearing its limits. I was driving a compact car because I liked the design and rarely had passengers, but I am considering buying a new one before the next car inspection. When I consulted with Joe about this, he agreed, saying, "It's your car, so do as you like. But if you're going to replace it anyway, why not get a larger car instead of a compact?" he suggested. And I agreed. The next weekend, we went to look at cars together. As we started looking at cars, Joe got more excited. The car, he said, was good, was quite expensive. Certainly, its performance was good. It was spacious inside, and there was nothing to complain about. But I hesitated because I hadn't considered spending that much. "How about I take out a loan in my name? The frequency of driving is about the same for both of us, and we're paying from our household budget, so it doesn't matter who does it," Joe suggested, and we decided to consider it in that direction. We went to look at other cars, but we liked the first one best, and decided on it. However, the loan was not approved in Joe's name. It seemed to have been flagged because he had just changed jobs. Then, Joe started swearing at the clerk. "I'm saying I'll buy it. Can't you do something about it?" This is one of the things I dislike about Joe. No matter which store we go to, his attitude towards the staff is somewhat condescending. When I tried to stop Joe, he got sulky and went outside to smoke. My husband has a domineering side. Whenever something doesn't sit well with him, he quickly threatens divorce, which is really tiresome. I profusely apologized to the salesperson. Perhaps it would be easier to get a loan if the amount was lower, or if it's cheap. I could pay in full. As I was consulting with the salesperson, my husband came back. "Hey, why not buy it under Cindy's name? I'll be the one paying anyway," he said, leaving me to ponder. Actually, I found this idea appealing, and other cars just didn't resonate with me. I nodded and signed the document. They said it would take a few months for the car to be delivered, so while I looked forward to its arrival, I drove around in my old car, cherishing our last moments together. My husband, sitting in the passenger seat, fiddled with his smartphone, saying, "Finally, bidding farewell to this cramped space, huh?" During the drive, I let my husband take over the wheel. As I casually glanced at the smartphone left on the dashboard, a message caught my eye. "Did you get a new car? And it's a luxury car at that." It was from one of my husband's colleagues. My husband seemed to have been showing off our new car. My husband has a vanity issue, though he probably hasn't mentioned that the car is bought under my name. I thought it didn't matter, but this car ended up changing our fate. 3 months later, the first place we went to in the newly delivered car was my in-laws' house. We visited to celebrate my father-in-law's retirement. My husband always says we need to honor his parents, so it seemed like a good opportunity. When my father-in-law greeted us, he excitedly looked at the car and said, "So, this is the new car. Nice! So cool!" I suggested, "Let's go out together in this next time," to which he responded with delight. My mother-in-law, too, said, "I want to go too. How about a spa trip?" She seemed excited, so I decided to make plans, taking into account their wishes. At my in-laws, we had a great time talking about my father-in-law's work and my husband's childhood. One memorable comment was, "I really wanted a daughter. I thought it would be fun to go out and share clothes with her. But it was you, Joe, who I gave birth to. She then added, "So Cindy, if you don't mind, let's go out together next time." I was thrilled. However, my husband didn't seem to find this amusing. Although my mother-in-law was only joking and she didn't say a word about not needing him, he was sulking. Before we got married, I found his pouting cute, but it becomes a bit annoying when it happens so frequently. Perhaps because his parents were present, he didn't say anything. But my husband often uses the threat of divorce to get me to comply when things don't go his way. We somehow managed to get through the situation and went back home. The next day, my husband came into the living room after work and declared, "The luxury car you bought will be a gift to my dad. If you oppose, we'll get a divorce." Huh? At first, I thought it was a joke and tried to laugh it off, but it seems my husband was dead serious. Hold on, why are you talking about this all of a sudden? Dad was looking at that car with such envy. That's why the best gift for his retirement would be to present him that car and let him drive it. That's the ultimate way to honor my parents. What? I was taken aback, but for some reason, Joe was adamant and wouldn't back down. He's always been stubborn, and there are times when he flies off the handle if I don't comply with him. Feeling bothered, I tried to reason with him, saying, "We agreed to go out with your father together, didn't we? Giving a car as a gift is..." But he wasn't having any of it. The argument continued, and Joe finally started to lose his temper. "As their only son, I want to give back to Mom and Dad. I want them to feel grateful for having a son, not a daughter." It seemed that Joe was still bothered by his mother's remark from yesterday about wishing she'd had a daughter. Perhaps he was feeling competitive because his mother had said she wanted to go out with me. I was flabbergasted, but there's no way we could afford to gift a car of that value. Why don't we gift them a trip to a hot spring resort? You agreed to this yesterday, didn't you? Still unsatisfied, Joe glared at me. "I married you, a woman past her prime, didn't I? You, with nothing to brag about. Do you know who's responsible for the life we're leading? Just once, listen to what I have to say." Hearing his harsh words, my feelings for Joe rapidly cooled. Past her prime, huh? I was aware of it, but it's infuriating when someone else points it out. On the contrary, I'm doing the housework, so I'm probably better off than Joe, who can't do anything. I'm also working, and our livelihood doesn't rely solely on Joe's salary. With these thoughts, the parts about Joe I dislike started popping into my mind. His attitude towards waitstaff, his quickness to sulk, his unreasonable stubbornness. I had been trying to ignore it, but now it was starting to frustrate me. As these thoughts swirled in my mind, Joe left the room and came back. Then he handed me something. Huh? What caught my eye was a divorce paper. When I looked up in surprise, he said, "Just sign the car ownership transfer document. If you don't like it, you can fill out the divorce papers and leave, okay? What's it going to be?" And what's more, the divorce papers were already filled out. "I've had it," I muttered. "All right." When I did, Joe nodded in satisfaction, tossed the divorce papers aside, and retreated to his room. The next day, Joe brought the necessary documents for the car's title transfer, saying, "We need these. Can we do a title transfer even though we've just taken out a loan?" I pondered this question as I took the documents. I decided to confirm this with the dealership where we bought the car. It turns out changing the title while a loan is still in effect is quite a hassle. On top of that, because the user is changing, my father-in-law's approval is required, meaning it couldn't be a surprise gift as Joe wanted. Moreover, my father-in-law never hinted at wanting a car. If I explained this, I thought, Joe would give up. I also discussed the option of selling the car. I wasn't sure if I wanted to continue driving it now that it felt tainted. It was a popular model, and production hadn't caught up with demand, meaning it could take a while to get a new one. Therefore, I could potentially sell it at a high price. If so, I could use the money to pay off the loan and choose a new car that I like. When I got home from work and told Joe that changing the title is complicated because of the loan, he said, "Then we have no choice but to buy another car. Dad will definitely be delighted." Excuse me? Dad never said he wanted a car. "Guess we're really getting divorced then," Joe mumbled, and returned to his room. I just couldn't take it anymore. I was willing to give it a shot if he apologized, but I couldn't continue this marriage. I decided to pack my stuff. I also decided to sell the car. The dealership offering the highest price agreed to pick it up at a later date. I felt relieved. I planned to move out while Joe was at work the following week. This would put an end to everything. With these thoughts, I finished my Friday shift and returned home to find that the car was missing from the parking lot. What? I rushed inside to check if the car keys were still hanging in the usual spot. It's not here! I turned pale and dialed Joe's number. However, no matter how many times I called, he didn't pick up. Even after I sent a message asking him to get in touch, he didn't even read it. Did Joe take the car somewhere? But that car is already... 3 hours later, I finally got a message from him. He said he was going on a trip with a colleague, and that we both needed to cool down. What? I exclaimed, involuntarily raising my voice at my phone screen. It was frustrating, but if he was going on a trip, he certainly wouldn't be coming back tonight. I decided to quickly put the plans I had made over the past few days into motion. I called a real estate agent I knew from work and signed the lease on the apartment I had asked him to reserve. I also contacted a moving company. The next morning, the movers came and moved out all my belongings, furniture, and appliances. My new place was close by, and by mid-afternoon, my new life had begun. Perhaps it was the weight off my shoulders, but I found myself dozing off. Then I was awakened by the ringtone of my phone. It was a call from Joe. He must have come home, found me gone, and was surprised enough to call, I thought, smirking a bit as I answered the phone. Cindy, can you help me? As I expected, Joe's voice was frantic, but he didn't seem to be at home. He went on. I've had an accident and my insurance isn't covering it. I didn't understand what he was talking about and responded, What? At that, Joe began to get angry. That's why! The new car's insurance! I called the insurance company because I had an accident, but they say it's not covered. As I listened to him, I finally understood. What do you mean you had an accident? Where? Are you injured? I asked, trying to show some concern. It wasn't my fault. The other party was inattentive. But more importantly, what about the insurance? I let out a sigh. I thought I made myself clear, didn't I? I told you not to touch the car for a while. And Joe, you said you understood, right? So why did you take out the car without asking? And remember, we made a promise to inform each other when using the car separately. None of that matters now. For now, Cindy, call the insurance company from my side. Hearing the word accident certainly made me nervous. But if he has the energy to shout like this, it probably wasn't serious. I calmly stated the facts. That car, it's currently reported as stolen. When I got home, the car was gone, so I reported it to the police. In fact, that car was scheduled to be picked up for purchase today. And now you're telling me there's been an accident? What am I supposed to do? I had the insurance canceled because the sale was confirmed. I canceled it when I told you not to touch the car. Hearing this, my husband, or rather, my soon-to-be ex-husband, started to panic. Whoa! Hold on a minute! Even if I was driving our car, it shouldn't be considered stolen. Then Cindy, can you first withdraw the theft report? I understand about the insurance. We can talk about the money when I get back home. But I couldn't just accept what he said. Oh, by the way, I almost forgot to tell you. You and I are strangers now. I submitted our divorce papers 3 days ago, and they were accepted. Also, I'm not living in that house anymore. What? He shouted over the phone, but I hung up anyway. Even after hanging up, his calls kept coming in, and it was so bothersome that I turned off my phone. The next day, I took a day off from work to sort out my room. When I turned my phone back on in the morning, it was filled with missed calls from my ex-husband. There was another call around 1 a.m., probably when he got home. But he's the one who flippantly filled out the divorce papers, and he's the one who threatened me with divorce. If he thought that by mentioning divorce, I would do whatever he says, he was sadly mistaken. Sure, when we first got married, I would comply when threatened with divorce. I thought it would be too embarrassing to get divorced so soon, after finally getting married at 35. That's probably why he thought I would comply this time too. But once all those frustrations piled up, I got over my hesitation. While I was cleaning up my room and thinking about these things, my phone rang again. I assumed it was my ex-husband, again. But when I checked, it was from my mother-in-law. I got a call from Joe yesterday. He was talking about an accident and something about Cindy leaving, and I couldn't make heads or tails of it. What's going on? She asked. So I explained everything to my mother-in-law. I apologize to you and father-in-law, but the divorce is final. As for the money for the car and the division of property, I'm thinking of arranging a meeting to discuss it in the near future. Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law apologized to me profusely and said, "If it's okay with you, could I attend that meeting? I'm afraid Joe might say something ridiculous." I agreed to have the post-divorce meeting at my in-laws' house. When I visited my in-laws for the first time in a while, my father-in-law was scolding my ex-husband. My mother-in-law, noticing my arrival, invited me into the living room. As expected, my ex-husband was sulking, but a bump on the head from his father forced him to reluctantly bow his head. But he said, "Because you only do what you want, my life is a mess." So I told him that I had consulted a lawyer about him constantly threatening me with divorce, which could be considered emotional abuse. Upon hearing this, my ex-husband's face turned pale. As a result of our discussions, we agreed that my ex-husband would pay for the original cost of the new car and the settlement for withdrawing the theft report. The difference would be covered by my father-in-law. On my way out, my mother-in-law said, "It's a shame that we couldn't hang out with you, Cindy." So I responded, "If it's okay with you, let's do it again," and left the place. It turned out that the ones who were with my husband during the accident were indeed the colleagues he had bragged about the car to that day. These colleagues were present at the scene, and thus learned about everything. The car was in my name, he was divorced, and that the car had been reported stolen. And so, rumors spread at his workplace, and he was being laughed at behind his back. Right around this time, there was a talk of a transfer, and he eagerly jumped on it, as he felt uncomfortable in his current position. But it was more of a demotion than a transfer, and he was sent to a rural area. He thought he would rely on convenience store food and laundromats since he couldn't do household chores. But when he arrived, there was nothing around him. It was a 30-minute drive to the nearest supermarket, and there was no laundromat to be found. Catherine, who invited me for a meal recently, said she was too scared to ask him how he's managing with his household chores. Catherine was genuinely surprised and delighted that I agreed to meet her, and now we get along as older friends. I'm satisfied now, having bought a new car within my budget and being able to enjoy solo trips, just like I used to.